More than just a cabinet to build, it's looking at a pile of lawsuits targeting the president-elect, several about Trump University. Our senior investigative correspondent Drew Griffin has been on this story from the beginning, and he says it is Trump's attorneys that are headed back to court on Friday in hopes of postponing that trial.
As I've said from the beginning,
the biggest lawsuit facing the president-elect are actually three, all surrounding his Trump University. 2 class action suits in California, one $40 million lawsuit filed by New York's Attorney General, all basically alleging the same thing.
Trump University.
Trump's real estate university wasn't a university. Trump's hand-picked real estate experts weren't hand-picked by Trump. And as exposed by a CNN report, Trump's so-called real estate experts, like top Trump seminar instructor James Harris, weren't really real estate experts at all.
Do you remember when you said this? I'm a former licensed agent broker. At 29, I became the top 1% broker in the country. I build homes in Atlanta, Georgia, and I used to live in Beverly Hills.
Yes. If I said those things, they are true. I did live in Beverly Hills, and
We have no record of you ever living in Beverly Hills.
Okay, well.
We can't find your broker's license anywhere.
Okay.
And I have no idea what homes you built in Atlanta, Georgia. You build homes in Georgia?
I'm not prepared to answer those questions today.
Last week in San Diego, federal judge Gonzalo Curiel urged both sides in the first class action lawsuit to settle the matter, given the fact Trump's about to become president. Instead, Trump's attorneys filed a motion to delay the actual trial until Trump becomes president. Political attorney Stephen Kaufman says the real strategy may be to delay the suit even beyond that.
Who knows what's going to happen once he takes office after January 20th that might further prevent him from participating in the trial and allowing his attorneys to conduct the trial at that point in time. So I would imagine a delay at this point would lead to further delays once he becomes president.
But the lawsuits against his school are just the beginning. There are dozens of lawsuits pending against Trump, and some filed by Trump, like the 2 restaurants that decided they wouldn't open in Trump's new old post office hotel in Washington after Trump made disparaging comments about Mexicans. Trump's suing them. They're suing Trump. Then there's the Republican consultant suing because she claims tweets calling her a real dummy ruined her reputation. Some Trump protesters are suing Trump, claiming his security team at Trump Tower assaulted them last year. His companies face suits involving sexual harassment allegations, golf membership battles, and even a fight over tips at a hotel. All of this going on at the same time. The president-elect is trying to form a cabinet, set a political agenda, and, oh yeah, turn over his entire business empire to his kids. Earlier this year, Trump's personal attorney, Alan Garten, told us he had already begun that task, and it wasn't going to be easy.
There's real issues there that have to be addressed.
Because legally, I don't think he can run the Trump organization while President of the United States, correct?
Yeah, I can't go into the details. There's obviously a lot of intelligent people who are working on these issues.
It is a lot to handle, which is why Stephen Kaufman thinks Trump should move to settle any lawsuits pending, and certainly not file any new ones. No lawsuit against the New York Times, no lawsuit against women who've accused him of sexual harassment.
If I was his lawyer, I would suggest he stay away from the courtroom as far as possible. I can't imagine any good would come out of testimony given in a court of law about the actions of the President of the United States.
Drew Griffin, CNN, Atlanta.
all right, so all these what-ifs and legalities in the air, what is the bottom line impact of what these pending lawsuits could have on the presidency? Let's bring in CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, Jeffrey Toobin. Here is the basic proposition you need to explain to us, which is the president, Trump, will want to delay any lawsuits. But there is a precedent that applies to the president when it comes to these things, and we learned it during Clinton. What is it?
In 1997, the Supreme Court decided almost this identical case. Bill Clinton was sued by Paula Jones, as many people remember, for sexual harassment, and his lawyers went to court and said, look, the presidency is too important to be distracted by something like this, so I have the right to put off my deposition, to put off my involvement with the case until I'm out of office. Bill Clinton lost. And the Supreme Court said very clearly, no person is above the law. So a district judge can offer accommodations, can let you testify by video, but you cannot
push it off
until the end. So he is going to have to deal with this at one point during the next 4 or 8 years.
So the question becomes, this Trump University, the main Trump University case, is set to go to trial in a few weeks, and Trump's team is saying, let's just wait until after inauguration.
Right. I won't be very busy.
Because I won't be busy as president.
But I mean, that's.
But do you think they'll get the delay at least?
Yes, they will get at least one delay and probably several delays. I mean, Judge Curiel, notwithstanding Donald Trump's criticism of him, has been accommodating. It has expressed his understanding that he has under very unusual obligations as president, but he can't put it off forever.
And now people will say, well, so what? It's a civil suit over fraud. It's going to wind up being about money. But what also did we learn with President Clinton? You get deposed, and what happens with what someone can do with a deposition?
Bill Clinton lied in his deposition, and he was impeached because of the deposition in the civil suit that was filed while he was president.
So granted, at least for now, he's got a Republican Congress on his side, which would make impeachment less likely. However, why wouldn't he just settle? I mean, the judge is urging him to settle.
Well, you know, this now we're dealing with Donald Trump, who is very proud. He says he never settles lawsuits. He does, in fact. We know that. But, you know, the plaintiffs' lawyers kind of have him over a barrel here. They would love to examine the President of the United States under oath. They feel like they have the leverage here. They are apparently making high settlement demands, and Trump is saying to his lawyers, don't settle. Obviously, the rational choice would be to settle the case. I think most people would understand it's not an admission of guilt. It's just a desire to move on. But I think he also recognizes, Donald Trump does, that he's got all these other lawsuits lined up behind it. And if he settles this one for a lot of money, everybody else is going to realize the cash register is open, and they'll hold out for settlements, and we could be dealing with this throughout his presidency.
You were saying something about how strong a case the New York Attorney General thinks he has.
You know, you've reported on the same situation. Yes, Schneiderman is a political official. He's a Democrat, and Trump has used that very heavily. But you know, Schneiderman doesn't want to lose, and the word out of his office, you know, when he's been public, he's been on TV and everything, saying they've never felt more confident about a case before than they do with this.
And Trump University really is a big problem for Donald Trump. When you look at what a really fly-by-night operation this was, and when you look at the representations that were made to students and the education that was really provided, it does seem like a fraud. There are certain rules that, you know, whether you can really be a university, and they were not a university by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know, you can see why Schneiderman and others who are, you know, moving it forward on the Trump University case have a lot of confidence. But, you know, obviously, any sort of sane observer from the outside would say, settle this case. Look at the peril that's the testimony, the time. But he hasn't settled it so far.
But his line has always been, and it's gotten him to the presidency, I'm a winner, I don't settle. He does, but I don't settle, and I'm a winner. And so now does he want to do that in the public eye? I don't know.
We will watch
Either way, it's in the public eye.
The number one request that clients have of their lawyers is to make it go away. And that's what will probably wind up happening. Jeffrey, thank you so much for making it clear, as always. What do you think about this? Tweet us at New Day. Post your comment on Facebook.com/New Day. There is a lot of news. There's reporting about the transition in the presidency. Let's get to it.
I'm not worried about it. I'm not looking back.
The transition team already facing signs of disarray.
The people who have been asked to move on have some relationship with Chris Christie.
He's going to put together an extraordinary administration.
It is worrisome. Trump should pick a Secretary of State that agrees with his foreign policy.
It's nice to have your name thrown in the ring.
This is a guy that came from zero to win the presidency. He knows how to put teams together.
The alt-right is all wrong for America.
Show America that racism, bullying, and bigotry have no place in the White House or in America. This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning. Welcome to your New Day. Allison is off. My friend Poppy Harlow joining us.
Good morning.
Always good to have you. So what do we have first? Donald Trump's cabinet still bare. No big announcements yet, but we have been hearing about people getting dismissed from the transition team. And now sources are talking about Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He's got a really big role in the transition. There's negativity coming out about him. Is it accurate? Trump is denying that there's any turmoil, even though 4 members of the team have been fired.
Meanwhile, the president-elect went to dinner last night and failed to let us, the press, know. Why does it matter? We're going to dig into that because this is the second time since winning the election that he has breached that long-standing protocol. We have every angle covered, starting this morning with Sunland Sarfati outside of Trump Tower, where the sun is up. It is a beautiful day. What are you hearing?
Good morning, Poppy. Well, it continues to be a turbulent transition for President-elect Donald Trump. Among those on his team who are now out, former Congressman and CNN contributor Mike Rogers, who had been a leading voice for months, a national security voice for months on his transition team, but who was closely aligned with former transition head Chris Christie. But amid all of this, top transition officials are continuing to push back, insisting that they're not in disarray.
President-elect Donald Trump's transition team continues to turn over, now purging key members of their staff.
Sometimes in politics, there are people who are in and people who are out.
Multiple sources saying Trump's son-in-law and close advisor Jared Kushner is at the center of the infighting and trying to oust all Chris Christie associates from the team.
The people who have been asked to move on have some relationship with Chris Christie. In my case, I was hired by him, and so there's a whole series of about 5 of them that fit that criteria that were asked to leave in the last few days.
Kushner has a complicated history with Christie. His father, Charles, a real estate developer, spending a year in jail after being prosecuted by Christie, then a U.S. attorney in 2004, for tax evasion, witness tampering, and illegal campaign contributions. But a high-ranking Trump insider is dismissing reports of infighting and says the purge of Christie loyalists is being mischaracterized. Trump, too, is pushing back, defending the transition as very organized process taking place as I decide on cabinet and many other positions. I am the only one who knows who the finalists are. Meanwhile, a source with close knowledge of the transition says that Kushner could likely end up with a top national security clearance as a key advisor to Trump, fueling concerns over nepotism and a potential conflict of interest as Kushner's wife Ivanka will manage Trump's empire. And as the waiting game continues over key cabinet slots, a potential roadblock for one of Trump's top contenders for Secretary of State, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
Just giving advice.
According to transition sources, Giuliani's lucrative consulting firm is being looked over by Trump's transition team to whether his business ties with several foreign governments would complicate his confirmation.
Well, I think it is worrisome, some of the ties to foreign governments, because that was a big complaint about many of us with Hillary Clinton.
Meantime, Donald Trump breaking protocol again as president-elect, ditching his press pool of reporters, slipping out for a late-night steak dinner with his family Tuesday.
Now, in the meantime, the president-elect himself this morning is pushing back hard against reports that he was pursuing and looking into the potential of getting some of his adult children top secret national security clearance. He's pushing back on a tweet this morning saying, quote, "I'm not trying to get top-level security clearance for my children. This was a typically false news story." And Chris and Poppy, we know, according to a transition source, that all of this seems to have stemmed from one transition staffer with close connection to the Department of Defense who seemed to have made this ask without having the proper authorization. Chris and Poppy?
All right, Sunland, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CNN senior political analyst and senior editor of The Atlantic, Professor Ron Brownstein, national political reporter for Bloomberg Politics, Jennifer Jacobs, and CNN political analyst and New York Times political correspondent Patrick Healy. Let's put out all of the freshest evidence of the reality inside the transition. Here is the latest Trump president-elect tweet on it. Very organized process taking place as they decide on cabinet many positions. I'm the only one who knows who the finalists are. That got criticism for making it seem like a reality show pageant, but he says everything's okay. But you have to contrast that with Elliot Cohen, well-known some conservative national security expert. He goes there to meet with the transition team, and he says this, after exchange with Trump transition team, changed my recommendation. Stay away. They are angry, arrogant, screaming, you lost, will be ugly. That's also known as to the winner goes the spoils. But Mike Rogers, CNN analyst, former congressman, very tight with Mike Pence and Chris Christie, just got dismissed from the transition team. He had this to say.
They clearly wanted to make a change in this regard, and so it came down that it was time they wanted to go in a different direction. And I think there is some confusion going on about a chain of command coming out of New York. Hopefully they'll get that settled pretty soon. I think they're going to need to do it because as this clock ticks, all of these decisions become more important, and you have to make them sooner with a little more authority and a little more forward thinking to make sure that they don't bump into anything in the future.
Jen Jacobs, can you relay the anecdote that you heard about Rogers being told and who knew and who didn't know that reveals somewhat of what's going on within the team?
Right. There is a lot of backstabbing and infighting, and it's hard to tell, what the motivations are, and they're not necessarily always communicating with each other. So I was told from someone within the transition team that they were told to call Mike Rogers and say, thank you so much for your service, but you're dismissed. And then an hour later, another top transition official called him for a scheduled meeting and didn't know that he had already been let go. So it's just that kind of, just not communicating with each other. I'm not so sure that Mike Pence even knew that Mike Rogers was going to be let go. And, and I got a lot of phone calls after I broke the story yesterday morning with people concerned saying Mike Rogers is a guy who commands real respect on Capitol Hill. He's a serious guy. Yeah. He really knows national security. And this was the guy who was supposed to be setting up, national security policies and setting up, recommending staff, getting things, paving the way for Donald Trump's national security team. And national security has kind of been a weak link for Donald Trump, and so they really needed someone who was going to be gunning hard at this, and which Mike Rogers was. And then so to yank him out there, all of a sudden, it puts the brakes on whatever they were doing. Now new people have to come in. And so people were not happy about that. So there was just like mixed feelings within Trump world about yanking somebody who was such a key player, smart guy, pulling him out of there.
In reading Jen's great story, I mean, the thing you come away from, feeling and then talking to people in Trump land is that so much of this is happening on the fly. And you've got someone, Jared Kushner, who's not, someone who comes out of a political organization who is making, I think,
he's never done anything like this before.
He's never done anything, and he's making a lot of quarterbacking calls. And it's not necessarily okay, we need to make sure that, Reince Priebus and, various sort of like people who technically should be in charge and are being empowered, know about these things. So the left hand doesn't necessarily know what the right hand's saying.
Ron Brownstein, to you, I just wonder if we, the media, the American public, are focused more on this now, and is it messy, and how messy, and to what extent, because it is Donald Trump in terms of being an unknown quantity, having never served in public office before. How much do you think it's that, and how much do you think it is really messier than most transitions?
Well, look, transitions are often messy. I mean, it's not unusual for a transition to be messy. But I think here, particularly in the foreign policy area, you do have a real issue, because the most conspicuous breach between Donald Trump and the existing Republican leadership was over foreign policy. Whereas you talked about with Jim Fallows, you had these extraordinary letters from dozens of former top Republican national security officials and ultimately two former secretaries of state, Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, basically saying they did not believe he had the temperament, experience, or judgment to serve as commander-in-chief. Someone like Mike Rogers, I think, was seen as a bridge between a Trump victory and that entire world of expertise and knowledge and experience. Now that bridge is gone. You have Elliot Cohen in that op-ed piece in the Washington Post going beyond the tweet, saying this was not a normal campaign. It was not a normal transition. It will not be a normal administration. I advise you not to serve. So, I mean, this is a real issue in terms of kind of whether Trump is going to be, the Trump administration is going to be completely divorced from the kind of existing Republican foreign policy, foundation that exists. Right. And so I think there's a real issue here, understanding the transitions often, kind of look a little chaotic.
A conclusion that I imagine President Obama would disagree with, because even if you don't like what happened in the election, you don't like the complexion of Trump's early stages, do you abandon the country? country when arguably they may need you most. Pat Healy, to understand why this is going on, you keep hearing his supporters of Trump say, man, he knows how to build a great team. I would challenge anyone to show me a great management team that Trump has ever built. It's not what he's known for. But he is known for loyalty. And you heard Mike Rogers say a New York power structure, right? Rogers is a D.C. guy. These are all D.C. guys. They're talking about Kushner and the family. But loyalty is the most important thing in politics because perception is reality, and those who care about you most will help control the perception. So can you fault Trump for defaulting into those he trusts the most?
No, and I think in a way you want a president who the country elected him, who sort of follows his instincts and who delivers on what he promised. That's what his voters are very much going to be looking for. Trump is a loyalty guy. The Trump organization, people like Mike Cohen have been there for a long time. These are the people that he listens.
He's a guy's name I'm surprised you're not hearing more of, by the way.
Hear more, but I think he's along the lines of like the Steve Bannon. He's very much involved sort of behind the scenes and doesn't want to become, let's say, a lightning rod.
He needs his best people around him. Where's Cohen?
Absolutely, no, absolutely.
Right now, his son is trying out for the White Sox in Chicago.
That is true.
That's true.
That is true. He does have a pro baseball tryout, and the tension with Cohen is they need him so much at the business. That do you risk stability of the business to bring him to the White House?
And that gets to the conflict of interest argument. Speaking of loyalty, there's also obviously the more than complicated relationship between Jared Kushner and Chris Christie, who's, pretty much out as well. But remember when Donald Trump months ago was accused of saying something anti-Semitic, and Jared Kushner came out and wrote this big thing supporting his father-in-law, and he's Jewish, and saying, he is not that for this, the X, Y, and Z reason. He has stood by his side through thick and thin, through it all. And look, Christie put his dad in jail.
Right. So Jared Kushner's father was the biggest donor to the Democratic governor at the time, had some things that he did, and people have said that Chris Christie pretty much had no choice but to prosecute these. These were pretty egregious crimes.
There was a sex tape involved.
Was there? I didn't know that part.
Poppy always knows that stuff.
But there was some
it's like 7 in the morning, Chris.
It was an ugly jersey.
You brought it up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Always blaming the media. Ron Brownstein, what do you think about one other quick take here? He went to dinner at the 21 Club, strong decision. Didn't bring the press pool, controversial. Why?
Well, because when the leader, he's going to be the leader of the free world, and the long-standing norm is that the press, has a protective pool following the leader of the free world, because you never know what is going to happen at any moment. And look, this is not the first norm that we have seen broken here. The failure to release the tax returns, the possibility of having his children run his business rather than a true blind trust. I mean, there are lots of things. And just one last point to kind of button up what we've been talking about. They've already, if you think about the structure of government with Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, you already have, in essence, two power centers. You have kind of one that is tied into the existing kind of Republican leadership, and one that reflects much more the influence of the alt-right. You have the entire, now I think from the transition you get the sense that there could be a third kind of structure, kind of an off-the-chart family kind of line of influence and decision making, and that is, you're talking about a lot of balls in the air in terms of who is going to have the ear of the president and what's just going to set the direction.
You certainly do, guys. Thank you very much. Ron Brownstein, Patrick Healy, Jen Jacobs. By the way, Jen, Christine Roman said you two were newspaper nerds together in college.
We were.
I love that.
Together, yes. She's a great girl.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Coming up right now, President Obama wrapping up his 2-day visit to Greece with the speech in the shadows of the Acropolis. From there, he heads to Germany, the second stop on his final trip abroad in office. Our Michelle Kaczynski joins us live from Athens. Michelle.
Hi, Bobby Wright. President Obama spent his last day in Greece touring the Acropolis here behind me. Now he's giving a speech to the Greek people. He made headlines yesterday during this press conference he gave. He was asked questions directly about the outcome of the American election, something that has been largely on the minds of people and leaders around the world. And gone was his optimistic tone. He criticized Republicans for what he called troubling rhetoric during the campaign, saying that it played into people's fears and frustrations, and he warned against letting that kind of sentiment further divide society along certain lines, calling it dangerous. Well, his speech here today is expected to focus more on shared democratic values here where democracy was born. He'll probably make the case that austerity measures are not a path to prosperity. He's also made a case for further debt relief for Greece. And from here, he then goes to Germany, where he'll be talking to European leaders about that, among other weighty topics. And, you know, on debt relief and helping Greece, that's something that the Greek people are worried that President-elect Trump will not help them with. Chris?
Michelle Kaczynski covering the president. Difficult. Hanging out in Greece. Not so difficult. It's good to have you on this morning. Thank you for joining us. All right, there's a developing story overnight right now from Afghanistan. 4 people killed, nearly a dozen injured in a suicide bombing near the defense ministry in Kabul. That's supposed to be a secure zone. There's been no claim of responsibility yet. The attack coming just days after a weekend suicide bombing left 4 Americans dead at the Bagram Air Base. That's supposed to be a very secure zone, the largest U.S. military facility in the country.
And a possible breakthrough this morning for people suffering from heart disease. A new injectable drug called Repatha reduces the risk of heart attacks by shrinking plaque that's clogging arteries. Researchers say it works best when paired with a statin therapy. A clinical trial found 64% of people saw plaque melt away. The results are published in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
Very interesting. Always good to find some way to keep people alive. Heart disease, big killer.
Huge.
The president-elect dismissing reports of infighting, saying there is no disarray during his transition. But what does the GOP think of Trump's potential cabinet picks? There is infighting, it is real, and we take a closer look.